Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the podcast, The Joyful Frugalista, and now here's your host, Serena Bird.
Hello, I'm super excited to share the good news that I have written another book, How to Pay Your Mortgage Off in 10 Years, responds to the cost of living crisis that many people find themselves in. Whether you are paying off a mortgage, you've paid off a mortgage, you aspire to buy a house and have a mortgage, or you know someone who does have a mortgage, this book will have lots of frugal tips and tricks as well as some finance hacks for you. Thank you so much. Yuma Frugalistas, and welcome. Today I have a special guest. In fact, I have two special guests. And of course, all of my guests are special. So today we're going to talk about something that's quite close to my heart, and that is property investing the right way. But first, I have a favour to ask of you. If you enjoy this podcast and find it useful, please pay it forward by sharing with a friend. And even better, please follow this podcast, The Joyful Frugalista. I love comments as well. Today, I'm going to chat with Kate Bakos and Pete Wargent, and actually Pete's dialing in from Europe, which is really exciting, who are authors of the book, The Buy Right Approach to Property Investing, Mastering the Skills to Invest Wisely in Property. Now, who are both of these amazing people? Kate is founder of Kate Bakos Property, a boutique independent Melbourne buyers agency firm and winner of Your Investment Property Magazine's Top Buyer Agent of 2018 award. She's won many national industry awards since 2013, a recent one being finalist in 2019 for the Telstra Businesswoman of the Year award, which is a very prestigious award. She served as president of the Real Estate Buyers Agents Association from 2019 to 2023, and she has qualified property investment advisor status. She is also a podcaster. She co-hosts the podcast The Property Trio. She's a regular commenter on TV, and on a personal level, she's continued to build a sizable property portfolio alongside her husband, and they like renovating, or at least they have experience with renovating. As to Pete, he is a financial and housing market analyst. He qualified as a chartered accountant in London, and he was previously a director at Deloitte. An avid investor, he parked his career in accountancy when he achieved financial independence at the age of 33. Congratulations and well done. But then not to stop there, he's gone on to author 6 books, including his best-selling first book, Get a Financial Grip, A Simple Plan for Financial Freedom. He is co-founder of an active property buyers agency in Brisbane and runs a personal wealth coaching business. And he is also a podcaster, being co-host of the top business podcast, the Australian Property Podcast. Welcome to both of you. We've got 3 podcasters here chatting today, so I'm sure we will not be silent.
Sounds good. It's lovely to be on the show, Serena. Thanks for having us.
You're welcome. Now, I have lots of questions, but actually I want to start by something we were chatting about before, and that is Noosa. And I'm chatting about this because Pete lives in Noosa, and I grew up there in the 80s and 90s, and wow, what a change.
It is a bit, isn't it? I feel like you're the sort of Noosa born and bred person. I'm just one of the many blow-ins to the region, but yeah, it's changed. We were chatting just before we started recording. It's changed almost beyond recognition. And this week there was a Queensland's second highest ever priced sale in Witter Circle in Noosa, which I know you're familiar with. So yeah, I mean, things have changed an awful lot over time, but it's a pretty good place to live and good place to bring up kids as well.
Yeah, no, I know Witter Circle well because I grew up there. Now, I'm conscious this is probably going to sound very braggy, and it's not the intention, but we grew up a couple of doors down from that. Now, the house was definitely not worth 30 million when we were there, and the house that did sell was a knockdown and rebuild, I believe. Very lovely home. I think 3 stories and lift and big jetty and quite a lot of work that's gone into it. And the house I lived in wasn't quite that status. It was pretty awesome though. And I do remember fishing from the pier in front of the house. I quite like that. Not so good at filleting or doing anything kind of beyond that. But I guess the moral here is that my mum was always a very good property investor. She was very good at finding property, but not so good at holding on to it.
Yeah, it's
Well,
something
I guess
that catches a lot of people out, isn't it?
Yeah.
And looking back at the properties that you let go, it can be quite devastating. And I say this a lot, Serena. It's not the first time I've heard something like that.
No, it's definitely. So I previously lived in Sydney, and the number of times you hear people say, "Oh, I used to own a property on the lower North Shore, or I used to own a place in the eastern suburbs," and looking back with regret. I suppose you're right. This is one of the key themes, being compound interest or compound growth, because even in the 25 years since I first went to Noosa, it's changed so much. But the price of real estate, when you look at the returns, and there was quite a dip in the global financial crisis, but it's almost sort of defies gravity when you look at the change in prices. And that's, I suppose, the compound growth in action. And it's very hard when you're sitting here today thinking in today's dollars to imagine what prices might be 5, 10, 20 years down the track, because our brains are programmed, I suppose, to think in a linear fashion rather than seeing results compound or multiply. So yeah, it's an important lesson, I think, to hold on to the good assets in your portfolio.
Well, yeah, growing up, like 1 million would have sounded astronomical, let alone 30. Like 30 for a house that was in one of the neighbours. It sounds crazy.
Yeah, I mean, there's the postcode where we live, which is 4, 5, 6, 7. I mean, when you look at some of the prices being achieved on the beach side there, we've got ex-prime ministers moving in. Yeah, it says the price of land coastally is extremely high. But yeah, it seems to be the way it goes in real estate. What's the old cartoon of the old guy looking into the shop window waiting for real estate prices to fall or whatever it was? Yeah, it does seem to be a recurring theme in property.
So I wanted to go back to a term you used, which was compound growth. So you hear compound interest spoken about a lot. What is compound growth and how is that different?
Well, I suppose this is what they call the eighth wonder of the world, if you're not familiar. I think, look, compound interest or compounding returns or compounding growth, it's really talking about the same thing. It's basically where you earn interest on your investment and then you earn interest on the interest over time. I think in real estate, the reason that people prefer to use compound growth, even though it's effectively the same thing, is that the rental returns on property generally aren't that good. By the time you've taken off the property management costs and the insurances and the repairs
Land
and maintenance.
tax.
Yes, particularly in Victoria.
Namely,
these
down
days.
here.
Yeah, it's the most expensive in Australia, I believe, in Canberra. So yeah, land tax.
Exactly, yeah. And those things are not getting easier. So the real sort of wealth generating machine in residential property anyway is the price growth over time. Exactly what we were just talking about with Witter Circle there, prices over the years going into the many, many millions. Well, I guess that's why people tend to say compound growth, because they're really focusing on capital growth in residential property.
Yeah, thank you for that explanation. It does make sense. Is it then becoming unaffordable for people to get started? How can people get started in property?
Well, it's a good question because we hear all of these stories and the media love this particular story. And I only a couple of weeks ago was asked to comment on how difficult it is for first home buyers to enter the market and how long it takes to save 20%. The reality is that we have had wages growth, not in line with property price growth. So that's the fundamental basis for some of these claims and stories. But we've also got some easier pathways for people to get onto the property ladder. And I could name them all. I started investing whilst I'd made my first purchase when I was 21.
Wow.
Having a less than 20% deposit was possible, but it wasn't easy. And the reason that it wasn't easy is we needed lender's mortgage insurance, and capitalising that wasn't easy either. LVRs, loan to value ratio caps, were tougher. And in addition, there was no stamp duty break or any kind of grant. And I'm not having a sook. I'm proud of what I did, and the entry price admittedly was lower. But back then, wages were lower as well. As a graduate chemist, I started on $32,000. I can't think of a graduate who's spent 4 years at uni who would be excited about $32,000. So things are relative. But it is harder in this climate, particularly at the moment with interest rates where they are, to amass a portfolio as quickly as you can when the rates are at lower levels. But if we're really honest about this and we look back at history, we're at historically balanced interest rate levels at the moment. I think a lot of people got quite accustomed to the low interest rates. And then when we had the emergency rates through COVID, 2% is not something to rely on. I maintain that, and I said it at the time. This is not normal, and it's not sustainable. It's not equilibrium, and don't bank on it. So 11 years of low interest rate environment will let all of us get accustomed to the new normal. But the reality is, at the levels we're at, I don't think long term there's a lot of movement that we can anticipate. So is it harder to get onto the property ladder? Some could argue that yes, it is. It certainly is harder now than what it was 3 years ago. But historically, I think a lot of fundamentals haven't changed. Pete, can I ask if you concur with that?
Oh, yes, but with a caveat. I think if you went back to pre-2007, I think we talked about this on another podcast, Kate.
Yeah.
I think certainly in the UK where I grew up, pretty much if you could fog up a mirror, you could get a mortgage. So you didn't necessarily need to save the deposit. Now, these days, a first home buyer might need to save 5%. In some cases, they might save 10%. So I think in one sense, yes, it's not harder, but in the other sense, it might be harder to pull together that initial deposit. And I suppose when you're thinking about frugalista type tips, saving the deposit is probably the biggest hurdle, I think, for a lot of first home buyers to make that first step onto the ladder. And look, there's no magic bullet, but I guess the thing is you've just got to isolate what are the big ticket items where I spend money. If it's going out, if it's overseas travel, cars, whatever it is, and you've really just got to prioritize the saving until the job's done. There's no simple, easy fix for that one, unfortunately.
No, but as you said, you've got to save up the deposit. If I cast my mind back to pre-2007, it wasn't a very long period there. I was actually a mortgage broker at that time. It wasn't a long period where we were just lax with credit. Prior to that, you did have to have genuine savings. And even through that period, you could get a low doc or a no doc, but it wasn't a 97% LVR if you were looking at a product like that. And the need to save something to get your foot on the property ladder has been there forever and a day. And only recently, I had a news article with my daughter, and she was a case study for one of the journos. And Gab is 17 and a half years old. She inherited $5,000 from her late grandma a few years ago, and we put it into ETFs. Mm-hmm. And she had an ability to look at that dashboard. We could log in and show her how her money was going. It wasn't until it reached over $6,000, she scratched her head and said, that's, gained a fair amount of money here. And we had to explain interest and share performance and, balancing risk and return. She was pretty excited about that. And so when she got a job at Boost Juice, which pays really handsomely over school holidays, I might say, she was really happy to retain $200 for spending money each week and give us the rest. Now, when your kid's getting every shift every day, they'll be bringing home up to $1,000 a week, which sounds like a lot for her age, but she didn't have much of a life over the holidays. Anyway, she's up to $16,500. And I said to her, let's circle in on the type of property that you could imagine a first home buyer property could be that would suit you. Circa $450,000, close to home, little 2-bedroom dated boutique apartment. Sydney siders are probably rocking in the corner hearing this, but in Melbourne you can get something in the inner ring. We live in Yarraville in the inner west, and she could pick up something like that quite readily. And so if she was to get the government assisted deposit guarantee, she needs a 5% deposit. And if she's living in it, she gets the stamp duty paid at that price point. So $22,500 is the goal for her. And this is a 17-and-a-half-year-old. She's not even able to legally sign a contract yet. But if she keeps doing what she's doing, she'll be 18 when she purchases a property. So my point is, saving that deposit doesn't have to be a lofty, intimidating goal. You don't have to go out and buy a $2 million property in Hawthorn because that's where you ultimately want to live. You've got to start somewhere. And if you pick the right property in the right location with the budget that you've got, you will get capital growth. It might not be the same as the $2 million house in Hawthorn, but hey, it's a start. When you're 18 years old, you've got a lot of compounding years to look forward to.
Yeah, no, my boys, I've also got them into ETFs and they really love it. Their grandfather had been giving them birthday money. And I was a bit funny about it initially because I was a bit like, I'm not a huge fan of giving children investment money. I like them to make their own pathway, but they had that anyway. And because they became very interested in that, we're now contributing a very small amount every fortnight so they can see it grow. So, and I love that idea that she's now got a goal. And what about helping children buy a house? So, Kate, you had actually a good case study about the work you had done with your stepson in your book.
Yeah.
So what are the sorts of things to consider if parents want to assist a child to get into the property market?
There are lots of ways that they can do this. They don't have to gift them money. You don't have to feel like a rich parent to be able to help your child. Sometimes they will have equity in their home and they're happy to release that. So there are all kinds of products that are specified and controlled. And some of them you need legal advice, and they might be your family pledge loans where your child can enter the property market without necessarily having to contribute their own money. So if they have saved some funds, they can save that for a buffer, or they can save that for some renovations, and the parent's equity forms 20% of the deposit. There's no lender's mortgage insurance, and the stamp duty also comes out of it typically. So that's one way where you're not gifting it. They're responsible for that loan. They have to eventually pay it down, and then your house is unencumbered again. Some parents don't have those resources at all, and just being able to offer moral support to help them have a clear strategy and isolate their must-haves from their nice-to-haves, and then go out and hit the pavement, see the opens. Then some parents will get their kids involved in seminars or reading books or meeting someone like Pete or myself. There are lots of different ways to do it. I decided that going in as a tenant in common, which is like a shared ownership that's not joint ownership. Rob and I could have a 50% share each in a property, and I was able to coordinate the 10% deposit, and he had to gift me his manpower to do the renovating because Rob is a tradie. He's a carpenter. So kitchen, bathroom renovation, decking, fencing. He gave me his hard labour over his holiday period, and in return, he got a 50% share in the property. And it tied in with it being a 21st birthday significant opportunity and gift. So that was one way to do it. With my daughter, obviously I've talked about her being eligible for a first home buyer opportunity. I don't actually want her to have to move out and live in a property by herself at 18 if university is close by. So the deal I've got with her is if you can save a 5% deposit, I'll match you a 5% deposit and I'll cover your stamp duty, which was a very similar kind of deal when I looked at how much we spent on Rob, how much we're spending on Gab. So, there's some of the ways that you can get creative to help your kids get a foot on the ladder.
Yeah, thank you for that. Pete, do you have views on helping children get in the property market? Should you do it? Should you not do it? Or are there any techniques that work better than others?
Oh, look, as Kate said, there's lots of different ways you can do it. You can buy jointly, you can act as guarantor. I mean, I should have grabbed a copy of my old book because I could have given you a plug on the video. But I think, look, my preferred way would be, as Kate has talked about, really start with the education. And I think if you maybe matching them if they're saving for a deposit, I don't think you want to necessarily take away all of kids' dreams and they're part of the journey because, as you always say, it's not the journey or the destination, it's the journey and the destination. You don't want to do everything for them. And also, you don't want to saddle them with too much debt. You really want to help them onto the ladder if possible. But I think, was it Warren Buffett who said you should give your kids enough so that they can do anything, but not so much that they can do nothing? I think there's an interesting tension there. Yeah, I think one thing that we like to do with the kids is if they save some money, we can offer to match it. And then if they want to invest it in ETFs or whatever it may be, it just helps them along the way and gives them an extra incentive.
Yeah, I like that quote a lot because you think you're helping your kids, but really you're just tying them to you rather than letting them go free.
And you're taking away that feeling of success and achievement. I didn't have parents that gifted me money. In fact, they didn't want me buying a property that young. My dad was worried I was going to flunk uni and that I was prioritising the wrong things. And I can proudly look back at it all and say I did it all by myself, which I've kind of taken away from our two. But without our help, my stepson might not have got his foot on that ladder as early. I mean, it was creating a commitment for him. We really wanted to lock him into have debt and have a committed savings plan because, it could have all gone on holidays and tattoos. And that wouldn't have been so great. And, the forced savings might have been a bit of a culture shock for him at the start. And it wasn't until he saw the refinance and the equity that was growing and then the opportunity he's continued to invest now. And then he got a taste of the lifestyle by just having us converse about where our portfolio's taken us. sometimes it takes a bit to get them kick-started. So each child responds differently as well. You've got to gauge that. And as my husband says, if Gab's nonchalant and not showing interest, you're not going out and giving her 5% deposit and buying her a place, which fair call. She's got to be really engaged and busting to do it and really comfortable and asking good questions so that she's learning as well.
And how was the quality of the work, the trades work on the property?
Excellent. Because Rob's ultimate goal is to lay in a hammock. And so he doesn't want to do work that requires him to go back and fix it. He's a really good tradesman, but he also really likes not having to do maintenance call-outs.
Fabulous. So great. So glad to hear that. So your book is all about finding the right way to invest in property. Is there one clear way to be prosperous? I mean, some people have different tactics, they have different approaches. You should invest in this type of product in this type of area. How prescriptive are you?
I would say, well, definitely not. I mean, when you think about it, real estate is such a highly diverse asset class. You've got everything from commercial property types, warehouses, medical centres, you've got farmland, and then all the way through all of the different types of residential property. You've got Airbnb. So, of course, there's lots of different ways to do it. I would say the most successful people, and I've been an advisor for 13 years, the people who make the biggest success of it usually are the ones who find ways to keep compounding the returns. And look, there's lots of different ways to do it. And if you've got an edge, Kate mentioned, potentially if you're a tradie, for example, you might want to lean into that edge. But I think a lot of the fundamentals, are what we talk about in the book. Kate's been at the coalface of property buying for years and years. So there's lots of real world case study examples that we put into the book, not just about the things that can go right, but also the things that people can get wrong. Yeah, but I don't think there's one way to do it. We talk about our preferred ways, and we tend to like to focus on quality over quantity, and there's certain things that we prefer in terms of holding periods, ideally holding for longer and things like that. But of course, there's
longer than the
ways
Witter Circle property we had.
Yeah,
not me personally, but yes.
Totally. I think Pete and I encapsulate the principles of sound investing in the book more so than a prescriptive approach. And in fact, Pete and I approached it a little bit differently as individuals, which makes it so interesting because there is no right or wrong. The things that I see out there on Facebook or new advocates spruiking the silver bullet, if I may use that word, there is no silver bullet at all. And so you see these hot postcodes and you see these 15 top growth suburbs. That's someone, looking around for the next hot property and they're trying to ride the wave or time the market. I think timing the market is one of the biggest mistakes that people can make. If you just make a sound decision and select assets that don't have any fundamental flaws, that fit your cash flow, and that's important because, we'd all love to buy something on Piper's Point and enjoy all of the gains, but we can't afford the cash flow. And even if you could, you might only just afford it. So you buy it, you sit on it, and there's nothing else for you to do with your money. You can't buy anything else. So making sure that you're in control of your cash flow and working out what sort of retirement plan you want. How much do you want to come from rents? When do you want to retire? Or are you looking at selling a property, triggering that sale, paying the CGT and reinvesting the money? And are you looking at holding it passively or actively? So will you be doing any renovating or changing or rebuilding units on a block? There's lots of ways that people can add value, but adding value isn't necessarily the key either. I personally think it's choosing something that doesn't have a flaw, making sure it fits your cash flow and holding it for as long as possible. My own personal investing approach is buy and hold until the debt is retired. So you can either go to your grave with debt, you can retire all of your debt like I am, or you can retire most of your debt and sell the properties that still have debt to make sure that all your debt's paid down and then reinvest that money in a different asset class. There's so many ways to do it. The ways not to do it is to jump around looking for the next hot spot and to try and time markets and to try and find the next silver bullet. And I just don't think that exists, and I think people get really carried away with it. It's not a short-term game, it's a long game.
There's a lot of costs with buying and selling, aren't there?
Heaps. You're trading in property. It's not like trading in shares. You've got your stamp duty, you've got your legal fees, then when you sell it, your agent's fees, marketing fees, capital gains tax. Just all sounds pretty ugly. And if it's a short space of time, you're whittling away your return. And unless you've got some superpower and you've created so much more value than what you spent on it, you're running against the wind. And if you have had great performance because of capital growth, well, did you really need to reno it?
Exactly. There's so many things to talk about. But one thing you do talk about in your book is the importance of thinking about suburbs that are about to be gentrified. This is an area that I'm really interested in. And another property story, my father, so my parents were divorced at this point. He bought this dodgy property, this house in Richmond, I think in the late 80s, or it would have been the early 80s.
We're talking
90s.
Melbourne, aren't we?
Yeah, Richmond, Melbourne.
Yeah.
You hear me, right?
Yes, I do.
And he had a tenant who off work for a period of time because he got bashed up on the way back from the pub one night. Like, this was the era in which he bought it. And like, I think we all thought he was a bit crazy at the time because it was such a rough area. But of course, you're from Melbourne. Like, what's Richmond like now?
Oh my goodness. This just reminds me of a really sad story that I know about. My father grew up in Richmond back in the day, he was born in 48 and lived in a beautiful double-story terraced house on Burnley Street on a corner. And the house and the block was so big, there's a block of apartments on that one block right now. Anyway, this gorgeous old house, we used to drive past it. Its name was Enfield. My late great-grandmother owned it, and she had 3 families living in that house with her because times were tough. And my dad's bedroom was a sleep out that cantilevered out of a back window and hung over the backyard. And the toilet was down the very back. So you're getting the story. Dad remembers the night man doing the toilet and, the ice chest for their fridge and all the rest of it. So it was a different era. But my grandparents had a shop and they made their money there. They didn't make their fortune. They were always modest, beautiful people, but they had enough money to move out of the old house. And then when my dad's grandmother passed away and the house sold, my grandfather took his money and got a loan, so took out a mortgage and built a house on a house and land package in Greensborough, which was like a Greenfields estate. So I just look at it and shake my head. They sold this iconic property that was a stone's throw from the city in what's now a very popular area, took out a mortgage and bought a house and land. Just don't understand. But, had they had that foresight and understood how much Richmond was changing, they would have been very, very wealthy people.
Yeah, but it's hard to know, though. What are some of the sort of signs that you can see that a suburbs or an area is about to gentrify?
Well, I'll tell you what, I'll just give you 2 seconds of my thoughts, Kate, and then I'll hand over to you. I think that there's a couple of very useful mental models for thinking about property. And one of them is the concept of bridesmaid suburbs or the ripple effect. Basically, if people get priced out of a suburb, a good example would be somewhere like Noosa Heads. They're going to move on to somewhere else that they can afford nearby, like Tewantin or Cooroy or somewhere like that. They call it the ripple effects, bridesmaid suburbs. I guess when you're trying to spot the next big thing, some of it is visual, just the change in the demographic. Some of it is changes in things like infrastructure and investment. So if you see a new Woolworths going in, you know that suburb is going places because Woolies have got a list of 200 criteria before they put in a new store. But then there's some of it is actually statistical as well. And Kate might speak to some of this. But for example, if you see a growth in dual income households where there's 2 people earning a salary, that tends to reflect a change in the demographics, more aspirational young professionals moving in. So some of it's visual, some of it's the ripple effect, and some of it's statistical. And Peter Kalizos, who's known as the property professor, has actually mapped out, and we've gone through this in the book, some of the statistics that you can look for from the Australian Bureau of Statistics and the census to work out when a suburb is set to gentrify. Kate, what can you add to that?
I love that. I love that you've separated it into 2. I would argue that when you start to spot the telltales physically,
could be too late.
You might be too late. You'll still get growth, but
point.
You've missed that opportunity. The hard thing about picking a gentrifying suburb is you've got to back yourself with your data, and you've got to buy into a scary suburb that's an ugly duckling sometimes before it's a beautiful swan. And you talked about Richmond and someone getting beat up. I've talked to people about gentrifying suburbs and they've said, oh, I'm really scared of that location. Well, yeah, hello. That's why you're buying it at a discount, because it has to start ugly sometimes. And it doesn't necessarily have to be ugly. It can be just daggy. But Pete's absolutely right. And it's a combination of statistics that you can get from ABS. And if you've ever looked into some of Peter Kalizos's work, he actually spoke about it on one of our Property Trio episodes. And we had a visual where he was mapping through all of these charts. And some of them you have to create a formula to get your other figures that you're reliant on. So there's nothing lighthearted about it. It's days of work if you're looking for a particular growth driver. But there are some clever matrices out there. And one of them is what we call a CEFA score. It's a social disadvantage score. And that's one that the ABS have put together themselves. And it shows whether that score is moving. And so your rate of change is what you're looking for when you're isolating a suburb for gentrification potential. And it's not one thing on its own, because there are some suburbs that can fool you. And when you look really carefully, there might be a blocker to gentrification. And sometimes, unfortunately, it's an overwhelming percentage of social housing. Because if that suburb's majority of dwellings aren't likely to change in terms of household incomes and education levels and social disadvantage, then you might not be getting the opportunity that you thought you could. And I could name plenty of suburbs in Melbourne that people think could offer all of this uplift, but there's something fundamentally holding them back. Sometimes it's just some really significant infrastructure spends that can get areas on their way as well. You know, put in one really significant employer that has high salaries, aka a hospital with specialist rooms and a raft of people that need to live locally that are earning incomes that would make most people's eyes water. Well, you'll start to see cafes and restaurants and things that cater to them. And let's just use, if anyone has visited the regional city of Ballarat as an example, if you cruise down Mare Street, which runs parallel to Sturt Street, we've had an explosion of bars and wine bars and whiskey bars and all kinds of things where, you know, your drinks aren't cheap. It's not like getting a pint of draft at the Peter Laylaw Hotel anymore. You're spending over $20 on a cocktail in Ballarat, and there's plenty of these places. And you scratch your head and ask yourself, well, what happened? Aside from the fact that we had an exodus of people who had lots of money to spend, it's become a bit of a weekend or day tripper place. But there's a place called GovHub on Mare Street that has 1,000 desks, and the vast majority of the inhabitants in there work for consumer affairs, and they had opportunities to move to Ballarat and have their stamp duty waived and all of those incentives. Well, that's a decentralised government hub that's brought a lot of Melbourne money into Ballarat. And of course, they're looking for wine bars because they don't want Carlton Draft at the pub.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate all the insights that both of you have shared. I think I could have spoken about Noosa and gentrification for a full hour. There's so many stories in there, I think, from all three of us. This is fabulous. Your book, The Buy Right Approach to Property Investing, Mastering the Skills to Invest Wisely in Property, is out now, and I think it's available at all good bookstores.
It is.
It is, and airport stores and Amazon, and you can buy direct from the publisher, Major Street, who you, of course, know as well. So
yes,
anyway,
also
you
my
can
publisher.
buy a book, you can buy it.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much to both of you for being my guest today. Thank you.
Thank you, Serena.
Pleasure. Thanks, Serena.
You've been listening to The Joyful Frugalista with Serena Bird. And of course, sound has been by Neil Hadley.
I would understand your mind. Oh, I'd love to be with you, walking toward the sea, and the times when I'm lonely, you could be the one to comfort me every day. Separate paths have crossed. Every night I lay my head down, I know I'll never feel across the river. We could start